The polished surface of the Galactic station shimmered under the weight of an uneasy calm. A low hum vibrated through the metallic floor as ships of every size docked and unloaded, yet there was an unmistakable tension in the air. It wasn't just the imminent peace talks with the Galactic Empire that had everyone on edge, it was the man they had invited to the table. Jack the Ripper, once a terror that haunted the streets of Victorian London, now stood poised before the highest commanders of the Empire. But this was no longer a man of shadows and bloodshed. No, today, he wore the face of diplomacy. The marble-floored chamber where the meeting would unfold was pristine, adorned with shimmering banners of the Galactic Empire, their symbols reflecting off the cold walls. Jack stood near the window, gazing at the stars, his back straight, his expression unreadable. His dark eyes gleamed with the sharpness of a man accustomed to navigating the complexities of power, though those who met his gaze felt the chill of his enigmatic presence. Commander Zephyros, a tall, broad-shouldered man in gleaming black armor, paced restlessly. He was one of the Empire's most decorated officers, a man with a reputation for ruthless efficiency. He stopped by the table, leaning over a holographic display of the sector map. His voice was clipped, calculating. "Do you trust him?" Zephyros asked, his tone barely concealing the underlying suspicion. Ambassador Fenner, a younger, idealistic diplomat, glanced up from a stack of encrypted data files. His face, though young, betrayed an earnestness that had yet to be worn down by the harsh realities of galactic politics. He was an optimist, one who believed in the power of negotiation and diplomacy to reshape the future. "I believe in the value of diplomacy," Fenner replied, his voice firm. "We need this treaty. His past should not cloud the importance of what we're trying to achieve." "His past is exactly why I don't trust him," Zephyros muttered. Jack the Ripper. The name alone sends a message. He clenched his fists. How can we trust a man who butchered his way through history to now represent the Empire? Fenner's brow furrowed, but he quickly composed himself. "We're giving him a chance to change. This is a diplomatic mission, not a trial. We can't hold his past against him forever." Zephyros snorted, but before he could respond, the heavy doors to the chamber slid open, and Jack the Ripper stepped in, his presence almost physically palpable. The room seemed to shrink with his entrance. The air grew colder, as though the temperature had dropped several degrees. Dressed in a finely tailored uniform, a stark contrast to the blood-soaked figure of his former self, Jack moved with a practiced grace, his every step deliberate, calculating. His eyes locked onto the two men, and for a fleeting moment, there was an unsettling silence. "Commander Zephyros." "Ambassador Fenner," Jack greeted them with a calmness that belied the storm of thoughts brewing beneath the surface. "I trust the journey here was to your satisfaction." Zephyros, though clearly wary, extended a hand. "Jack," he said stiffly, his eyes lingering on the scarred face of the man who had haunted Earth centuries ago. "I don't believe we've ever had the pleasure." Jack accepted the handshake, his grip firm but not overly aggressive. "The pleasure was yours, Commander." Ambassador Fenner cleared his throat, stepping forward with a warm, welcoming smile. "Thank you for making the trip, Mr. Ripper. We are eager to begin the talks." Jack's lips twitched, but he said nothing in reply. His gaze wandered to the holographic map that displayed the disputed borders between the Galactic Empire and its neighboring systems. Fenner, sensing the tension in the room, gestured to the map. "As you can see, the situation is delicate," Fenner continued. "We're on the brink of war, but there is hope that a new agreement can prevent bloodshed." Jack's eyes flicked over the map, his expression unreadable. He didn't respond immediately, letting the silence stretch unnervingly. Then, he spoke in a voice as smooth as silk. "Bloodshed is a currency I understand well, Ambassador. But sometimes, war is not the worst outcome. Sometimes, it's what comes after that defines who we really are." Fenner stiffened at the words, but Jack's gaze never wavered. Zephyros's hand hovered near his sidearm, a reflex born of years of combat. "We don't have time for philosophy. What we need is action." Jack gave a slight, almost imperceptible smile. "Then let us begin, Commander." Time is indeed fleeting, and there's much to be done. The Empire had come to this negotiation with grand hopes of securing peace. But as they soon learned, the Ripper was no mere diplomat. He had the mind of a strategist, the soul of a killer, and the capacity to tear through any obstacle, be it political or personal. The air in the room grew thick with the weight of their history, and as the meeting unfolded, it became clear this was no ordinary diplomatic mission. There were no guarantees in this fragile galaxy, especially when a figure as dangerous as Jack the Ripper entered the fray. In the silence that followed his words, Jack allowed the tension to settle around them. His role was clear, but his purpose, that, too, would soon become impossible to ignore. In the first move, the game's opening gambit had just begun. The emergency alarms blared to life without warning, echoing through the sleek, sterile hallways of the diplomatic station. The sudden shriek of sirens cut through the tension in the chamber where Jack, Commander Zephyros, and Ambassador Fenner had been deliberating. Fenner jolted upright, eyes wide with disbelief, while Zephyros moved with practiced efficiency, his hand instinctively going to his sidearm. "What's happening?" Fenner asked, his voice sharp, betraying a crack of panic. Zephyros, already moving toward the communications console, gave a brief glance over his shoulder. "We're under attack." Before Fenner could respond, a cold, menacing voice broke through the static, the voice of Jack the Ripper, as calm as if discussing the weather. "They've come for us," Jack said, his eyes narrowing as he took in the various hollow screens displaying flashes of red across the system map. "And it's not the Empire they want." Fenner turned toward him, confusion on his face. "What do you mean?" "The Empire's the target, right? Our negotiations." "No," Jack interrupted, his gaze not leaving the chaos unfolding on the screen. "This attack was meant for you, Ambassador. You've been betrayed. The Empire doesn't control this sector anymore." The reality of Jack's words hit Fenner like a cold wave. His hands trembled slightly as he fumbled for his comms device. "What are you talking about?" he murmured, glancing between the map and Jack. Jack looked back at the map, his face unreadable. "Someone wants you dead. And they've sent an army to ensure it." Zephyros barked an order into his communicator, his voice cutting through the rising tension. "Deploy all defenses. Get me a full sweep of the station's perimeter. And don't just stand there." His eyes snapped to Fenner. "Get to the command center. Now." Fenner barely registered the command. He was still grappling with Jack's words, trying to process the reality that had just shifted under his feet. "This doesn't make sense," Fenner whispered, eyes wide. "We're supposed to be making peace, not starting a war." Jack slowly turned to face him, his expression darkening with something almost resembling pity. "That's the mistake you've made. You thought the Empire was a beacon of peace. But peace is a tool for the strong to manipulate the weak. And the weak don't know they're being played." Before Fenner could protest, the loud crack of energy blasts cut through the air as the station shook violently. The lights flickered, and a loud crash reverberated from below. Zephyros, unfazed, tapped a few commands into the nearby console. "We need to secure the lower decks. Full lockdown." The tension in the air was palpable now, thick with the weight of unknown enemies closing in. Fenner felt his pulse quicken, his earlier belief in unity now tested by the harsh reality of galactic politics. For the first time since arriving, he questioned the wisdom of his mission. What had he really been sent to negotiate? Suddenly, Jack spoke again, his voice steady as always, but there was an edge to it now, a sharpness that suggested he understood more than he let on. "The Empire's already too late. We're not dealing with a simple faction or rogue fleet. This attack is personal." Fenner's eyes darted to Jack's face, a flicker of understanding crossing his features. "You knew this was coming, didn't you?" Jack didn't flinch. "I knew someone was watching. But I didn't know it was going to be this bad." He allowed a brief pause. "But that doesn't matter now. We either fight or die. Which will it be?" A tremor of fear ran through Fenner, but he clenched his fists, trying to swallow it down. "We fight," he said, his voice more resolute than he felt. We're not backing down. Zephyros gave him a nod of approval, then gestured to his officers. Prepare for battle. Seal the perimeter. The enemy wants the station, let's make sure they don't get it. As the commander barked orders, Jack turned back toward the window, his eyes scanning the stars outside as though he were looking for something in the dark. His presence was suffocating, a reminder of the darkness he carried with him. Fenner hesitated for a moment before following Zephyros down the corridor. His mind raced with questions, but one stood out above the rest. What does Jack the Ripper really want? They reached the command center just as the station lurched again, this time more violently. A series of explosions rattled the walls, and Fenner stumbled slightly, gripping the edge of a control panel to steady himself. We've lost control of the lower levels, a technician shouted. Enemy forces are already breaching the central hub. Zephyros's face tightened. All personnel, prepare to repel boarders. We'll fight until there's nothing left. Fenner barely heard him. His thoughts were elsewhere, swirling with the realization that he was part of something far larger and darker than he had ever imagined. The fragile idealism he'd clung to was slipping away with each passing second. Jack's voice drifted into his mind. The Empire's peace is a tool for the strong to manipulate the weak. A shiver ran down Fenner's spine as the sound of battle grew louder. They had no way of knowing who was attacking or why, but one thing was clear, the storm had only just begun. And Fenner was about to learn how deep the conspiracy ran. In the distance, the faintest hint of a new fleet appeared on the tactical display. The enemy was coming. And with them, the true test of what the Galaxy, and Fenner, were truly made of. The pulse of gunfire rumbled through the station like distant thunder, but the sounds only grew louder as Fenner stepped into the command center. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and sweat, as officers scrambled to maintain order in the chaos that had erupted just moments before. Fenner's heart raced as he joined Zephyros by the main holodeble, which now displayed a swirling mass of red icons, enemy ships, closing in. He could feel the tension in the air, the weight of something far more sinister than simple space pirates. This wasn't an attack, it was an execution. The enemy is closing fast, Zephyros said, his voice clipped, professional, as though he had done this 100 times. They'll hit the central hub within the hour. If they breach the core, the entire station will go dark. We'll be sitting ducks. Fenner swallowed hard. His throat felt dry, and he could taste the acrid tang of fear in the air, though he would never let Zephyros see it. He wasn't the naive diplomat he had been earlier. Who are they? We're not dealing with raiders, are we? Zephyros met his gaze, his eyes hardening. No. This is something else. These ships don't belong to any faction in our records. They've been hiding in the shadows for months. Someone's been waiting for this moment. Fenner turned to Jack, who stood by the window, his expression impassive as he watched the conflict unfold from a distance. He seemed more a specter than a man, detached yet in control of everything around him. Fenner's gut twisted with unease. Jack wasn't just a survivor of the past, he was a ghost who carried the weight of that dark history into the present. But now, in this moment, he was something else entirely, someone who knew exactly what to do when the stakes were life and death. What do you know about them? Fenner asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though the desperation in his words was clear. Jack didn't turn his head. I know enough, he replied cryptically. But not everything. Whoever they are, they've been studying you, Ambassador. Studying your every move since you set foot on this station. You were never meant to negotiate peace. You were always the target. Fenner's breath hitched, and his thoughts spiraled. His every action, every word had been watched. The lies he'd believed seemed so trivial now, crushed beneath the weight of Jack's revelation. Had the Empire been in on it? What's the plan? Zephyros asked, cutting through the silence. We can't afford to sit and wait. We need to take the fight to them. Jack turned away from the window, his sharp eyes now fully focused on the task at hand. First, we need information. We can't fight what we don't understand. Send a scout out. Probe their fleet, see what we're dealing with. Zephyros frowned, shaking his head. The enemy has us outgunned. Any attempt at probing will be a suicide mission. Jack's lips curled into a tight, humorless smile. That's where you're wrong, Commander. The key to winning a war is never brute force. It's about understanding your enemy. They've underestimated us. They don't know who's in charge. Fenner watched as Jack moved across the command center, his movements fluid and confident. Every step was calculated. Every glance held a purpose. It was as though Jack had been preparing for this moment his entire life, though it was unclear how much of that preparation had to do with diplomacy, and how much had to do with something darker. Jack reached a nearby console, his fingers dancing over the holographic controls with ease. I need access to all communication channels. We'll send them a message they can't ignore. Zephyros' eyebrows furrowed. Are you suggesting we negotiate with them? They're here to kill us. Not negotiate, Jack replied with a dangerous glint in his eyes. Send them a warning. Make them think twice. As Jack worked, Fenner's mind raced. This was it. This was the moment where everything could change. His role had shifted from peaceful ambassador to a pawn in a game that stretched far beyond the Galactic Empire's borders. Jack, it seemed, had already accepted his place in this war. But Fenner? He was still trying to piece together the puzzle of betrayal and survival that Jack had thrown into his lap. Their ships are too fast. We won't be able to get a clear shot at them with our weapons, Zephyros continued, his voice a mixture of frustration and determination. We need to think smarter, not harder. Jack paused, eyes scanning the holomap. Then, with a nod, he turned back to Zephyros. You're going to need to use their arrogance against them. Fenner frowned, confusion spreading across his face. Arrogance? Jack smiled grimly. Yes. They're confident they can take the station without breaking a sweat. They think we're already broken. That's where they're wrong. Suddenly, an alarm blared again, this time sharper, more urgent. Enemy ships inbound. We don't have much time, the officer shouted. Fenner's pulse quickened. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't a game. Their survival was on the line. Time to show them what humans are capable of, Jack muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. The last of the words settled heavily in Fenner's mind as he turned to face the looming threat. Humanity, it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving that, even in the face of impossible odds, they were a force that could not be ignored. As the ships closed in, the room grew electric with anticipation. Jack had made it clear, they would fight, and they would win. But whether or not they could emerge unscathed was yet to be determined. And the clock was ticking. The blaring alarms echoed through the station's halls, a constant reminder that time was running out. Fenner's breath came in shallow bursts as he raced down the narrow corridors of the station, his boots echoing against the metal flooring. Behind him, Zephyros barked orders, sending crew members scrambling to their stations. There was no time to waste. The enemy was nearly upon them. Fenner's mind raced. He couldn't help but wonder how they had come to this point. What started as a diplomatic mission, a simple gesture of peace, had spiraled into an all-out war. The revelation of Jack's hidden past had turned everything upside down. The sudden realization that the station, their lives, and even the fate of the human race hung by a thread sent a shiver of uncertainty through him. But one thing was clear, humanity had never been so vulnerable. And never before had the need to prove their worth felt so urgent. As they approached the war room, Fenner's stomach tightened. The plan Jack had devised, the only plan, was their last hope. He knew it, and Jack knew it too. In fact, Jack had never seemed more in his element. The cool resolve he'd shown in the face of chaos had become their guiding light. For all his darkness, Jack was the beacon of hope they so desperately needed. Zephyros slammed open the door to the control room, his expression grim. Inside, a map of the station flickered to life on the central holodisplay, showing the approaching enemy ships. Their numbers were overwhelming, and Fenner's stomach lurched. But Jack stood before the display, his back straight, studying the grid with an intensity that bordered on obsession. "We're out of time," Zephyros said, his voice sharp. "How do we do this?" Jack didn't flinch. "We bait them." Fenner blinked, confused. "Bait them? With what?" "With us," Jack replied, a smile playing at the corner of his lips. "They'll underestimate us. They think we're broken. But they've made one mistake, they don't know who we are. We'll give them a target they can't resist, and when they take it, we'll spring the trap." The gravity of Jack's plan hit Fenner all at once. They were going to use themselves as bait. The thought of it made his pulse quicken. Could they really pull it off? "What's the catch?" Zephyros asked. "You've always got a catch, Jack." Jack met his gaze, his expression unwavering. "We can't win without a fight, Commander. But we've got something they don't, heart. They'll never see that coming." Fenner looked at the map, where the enemy fleet continued to close in. He could feel the weight of the plan settling on his shoulders. It was bold, reckless even. But it was their only chance. With a deep breath, he turned to Jack. "You're sure about this?" Jack's eyes hardened, and for the first time, Fenner saw something other than calculation in them, something deeply human. "I've lived in the shadows for too long. It's time for them to see who we really are." The tension on the bridge was palpable as the countdown began. Every second felt like an eternity. Fenner stood beside Zephyros, watching the enemy ships on the holodisplay, waiting for the moment to spring the trap. His pulse drummed in his ears, and every instinct screamed at him to run. But there was no escape. Not now. "Targeting systems online," Zephyros said, his voice steady, but Fenner could hear the strain beneath it. "We've got one shot at this." Jack moved to the center of the room, his gaze fixed on the approaching fleet. "Hold fire until I give the word," he commanded. Fenner's hands clenched into fists. The waiting was the worst part. The fear, the uncertainty, it gnawed at him. He had once believed in peace, in dialogue and diplomacy. But here he was, preparing to launch a counterattack. How had it come to this? "Almost there," Zephyros muttered, his fingers dancing over the controls. 5 seconds to impact. Fenner's breath caught in his throat. This was it. The moment that would determine everything. "Now!" Jack shouted. In that instant, the entire station seemed to come alive. Lights flashed, alarms blared, and the deep hum of the reactor thrummed through the floor. With a gut-wrenching roar, the station's defenses fired, sending a barrage of energy blasts into the heart of the enemy fleet. Fenner watched in disbelief as the energy pulses shot out from their position, striking one of the enemy ships dead on. A massive explosion lit up the darkness of space, sending shockwaves through the station. But the trap had been set, just as Jack had predicted. The enemy fleet faltered, briefly thrown off balance by the unexpected resistance. And that was all they needed. "Now, Zephyros," Jack growled. "Activate the secondary cannons. Full power." As the secondary cannons roared to life, the tide of the battle began to shift. The enemy, now realizing they had underestimated their opponents, scrambled to retaliate, but it was too late. Their forces were already in disarray. Fenner stood frozen, watching as the once imposing enemy fleet started to crumble under the barrage. The room erupted in cheers, but Fenner's mind remained clouded. This victory was far from over. There were still questions, still shadows lingering on the horizon. "Jack," Fenner called, his voice trembling. "What happens next?" Jack turned to face him, his eyes unreadable. "We rebuild," he said, his tone firm. "And we show the galaxy what humans are capable of." Fenner nodded, a sense of determination rising within him. For the first time since this ordeal had begun, he felt it, a spark of hope. Humans weren't just survivors. They were fighters. And now, the galaxy would know it.